All right, hello, hello. We're looking at Dada and Surrealism today. Surrealism, of course, is probably second most popular art movement in the modern era. I think Italian Renaissance would be probably up there too. Everybody loves Surrealism, but we have to talk about Dada first. And so Dada is a reaction to World War One. And with all the destruction of World War One, everybody was questioning all of what was in culture, um, all kinds of things they were questioning. And so there used to be a thought that before World War One, as time progressed, as um, the the future was seen as being beneficial, and that it would be positive, and that was no longer an idea after World War One. So you have to question everything, and that's what the Dadaists do. So, of course, the main person when we talk about Dada is none other than Marcel Duchamp. And here he is actually painting his father on the left and then a friend's father on the right. And a lot of people, when they know anything about Duchamp, they think of the urinal and the ready-made, which we'll talk about in a couple minutes. But actually, he did have a talent to make something look realistic. He wasn't hiding his inability to create art in that old sort of way. It's just that he rejected it. And so this is one of the most famous works from Duchamp, and I would even say maybe one of the more famous works in art history. It's Nude Descending the Staircase, and it was a painting that showed movement as opposed to just a static person on the stairs. So that was new. And there was a group of modernists in America who wanted to introduce modernism to the United States. And so they had this show in 1917 called the Armory Show. And one of the main highlights, one of the most discussed paintings in that show was this one by Marcel Duchamp, Nude Descending the Staircase. Some people have called it a explosion in a piano factory. And then this is The Bride, and it's another example of his early works in which he's exploring movement. And I've always kind of wondered, at least today I am, was he familiar with what Picasso and Braque were doing with Cubism? It'd be interesting to know. And yeah, so that's the two first paintings that we're going to look at. Then, here we go. So, one of the things that the Dadaists wanted to do was to question the worship of art of the past. And so he takes the most famous painting in the world and puts a mustache and a goatee on the Mona Lisa. Down below, the acronym in French says, she's got hot pants. And so this would have, it did cause, I don't think this one necessarily stirred up as much as some of his other works. But there was a student of mine named J.C. Borelli who did this very funny, very simple video where Duchamp and Leonardo da Vinci meet in heaven. And Da Vinci is so mad at Duchamp that they have a sort of mortal combat in this video that he made. It was very, very fun. Okay, so here we go. So Duchamp is in New York City. He hears about an art show in which you can pay $6 and you can get any work of art into this show. So he went to a plumbing store, bought a urinal, put it in an interesting sort of angle, and then put R. Mutt, one of his aliases, 1917, on it. This is what we would call a ready-made, and a ready-made is something that Duchamp himself doesn't really well, obviously he doesn't necessarily create the work of art. So now you have art that is not necessarily by the hands of the artist, and this changes the game. Because of this, we have, well, we would have gone into conceptual art anyway of the 20th century, but Duchamp is considered the grandfather of conceptual art for sure. Then that is when the idea is more important than the object. Okay, here's the probably second most famous ready-made. It's the bicycle on the stool. For me personally, and you don't have to agree with what I have to say about this, and certainly there's been students present and in the past who have not drawn this line, but to me, if the artist somehow changes the object, then I then consider that to be along the lines of what I would define as art. Again, you can draw your line wherever you need it to be. And so for me, this is a work of art. And I guess the fountain is a work of art because he puts our mud on it. I don't know. This one works for me. Okay, so this is called The Bride Stripped Bare by Her Bachelors, Even. And it's 4 panes of glass. And in between the panes of glass are, I don't know if it's paper or what exactly is in between. One of them is looks like a coffee grinder down below, and famously they were moving this piece, and it dropped, and the glass had cracks in it, and Duchamp supposedly said, now it is finished. Again, going into that idea of it's about the process for Dada as opposed to the final product. Okay, this one I struggle with personally. This is Bottle Dryer. It does look sculptural, that's for sure. Upper left is, what do we got upper left? Ready-made comb. And then down below is hat rack. Okay, and then this is obviously we know this because we're in Minnesota. This is a snow scoop, a snow shovel, and this is where sometimes the visual art students get angry because they don't think it's a work of art. And then he had this drag persona, Rose C'est la Vie, which makes total sense that Duchamp would play with gender because he's playing with everything else. And then on the left is a perfume bottle that he puts a label on. And he also, I think, puts Rose C'est la Vie on the gold decoration of the outside of the box. So very famously, he was somebody different at times. I like this one quite a lot because apparently when you pick it up, it rattles, so there's something inside the ball of twine. I would suspect that art conservators have taken it apart and seen what's inside there. I don't know if I've ever read anything saying what it is. I guess it could be a marble or something. And this one, I think, is from the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which has the best Duchamp collection in the United States, maybe the world. And I think it was a couple, maybe, who that collected his works, and somehow they ended up in Philadelphia. But anyways, so if after this lecture, if you're really loving this stuff, make plans for Philadelphia. Okay, and then this is what? Well, it's a check. So what are we looking at here? Yeah. Okay, yeah. So yes. So this one is a difficult one to sort of get your head around. Um, there's a very famous conceptual artist named Boggs who would go into a restaurant and order food, and then he would go up to the owner of the restaurant and say, I make Boggs money. And he did, and look it up. It's online. It's just absolutely beautiful. Dollar bills with Boggs' head on it instead of the head of a president. And he says to the owner, "Look, you could have me pay just regular money for this meal, or you could let me pay in my Boggs money, and then a collector of my art is going to come into the restaurant and pay you more to purchase back the Boggs money than what would my meal would cost." And so it kind of reminds me of this piece where it's just a check. And then he had other aliases, and he put out a wanted poster for himself, which is very funny. Yeah, alias. I can't read it so well because it's smaller on my. George W. Welch, I think, is one of his aliases. Okay, so there's lots of work that Duchamp produced, and he hired extra people to basically make a miniature of all of his most famous works and put them in a suitcase. And put them all together in a collection case, I guess is the better way of saying it. And there are a few museums that have these. I don't believe Mia does. But I think it's just a sort of a fascinating concept to, basically have your life's work within inside a very small compartment. I think it's pretty genius. I like to the little bit of the left is a miniature of the fountain, formerly the urinal, which is pretty cool. All right, now we're going to move away from Duchamp, and we're going to go to Kurt Schwitters. He is from Germany, and he did collages, among some other things. And he was also a poet, an incredible poet. And yeah, so here's one of his works. And then here's another. I could see this influencing, students at Perpich. It's a style that I think is attractive to people. Various different, there's various different colors to it. It looks like a lot of found objects, which becomes popular, of course, partly because of Duchamp. But yeah, I could see a student really being enamored with Kurt Schwitters. And I've always liked this one because I think when I was in kindergarten in the early 70s, I think I probably had one of those cards with fruits on it. So there it is. And other things are there as well, of course, but for some reason I'm really drawn to this one. Okay, Man Ray was from the United States and is known more as a photographer. There's a huge Man Ray exhibition that's traveling around the United States right now. And this is a painting that he did of Alfred Stieglitz, who we'll get into later on in the course. Stieglitz was a promoter of modernism more than probably anybody else in the United States in the early 20th century. And I think Man Ray appreciated him because also Stieglitz is, Stieglitz convinces everybody that photography is not a mechanical process, that it's actually an art form. Okay, and then this one really, to me at least, shows the influence of Duchamp for sure. This is called The Rope Dancer Accompanies Herself. Yeah, very Duchamp-esque in the title. And then he did these photographs that he called rayograms, rayographs, and they're a particular sort of photography. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit more about rayograms. So they're you place the objects directly onto a light-sensitive paper and expose them to light, and it produces a ghostly, often abstract and dreamlike image. The technique is known as a photogram, and I'm sure the media students know that. And then this is, again, one of his more famous works, where he's turning a woman into a cello, or maybe a violin. Yeah. Okay, so that's that. Let's see. Oh, yeah, so there is a pretty big interest in African culture in the early 20th century with some of the modernists, and particularly with Picasso, of course. And so this is an interesting juxtaposition of a white model against an African mask. So yeah, he's the question is did he truly have interest in African culture at a high level, or did he see it as a means to an end, to understand, or to create a interesting image? This is Lee Miller, who was his assistant and I don't know if to call it, I'd say mistress. She learned a lot from him. It was not an even power dynamics relationship, I would say. But after she left him, she became one of the most famous photographers in all of art history. And in particular, her work as a frontline photographer in World War II made her very, very famous. And then she moved to the English countryside, and became a cookbook author. There's a lot of interest in Lee Miller these days. Lots of publications. I have a few of those. And there was a biopic made with Kate Winslet just about 2 years ago. So Lee Miller, a very fascinating artist. And then here's some more what we would say probably ready-mades. And on the right is probably one of his most famous. And you can tell it is a photograph of Lee Miller's eye. So he left instructions to have the mechanism go back and forth. I think it's called a metronome. Okay, so what happens to Dada? It basically dies out. And I've always had the date of Surrealism's invention at something like 1923. But boy, has there been so many different shows as of late celebrating the 100th year of Surrealism. I would have to believe maybe my date was a little wrong. Okay, indeed, my date was wrong. It's 1924. I was just off by a year. No biggie. Okay, so let's read this out. Surrealism. In place of military, the family, and the church, Surrealists would celebrate the imagination, sexual liberty, and prompting of the unconscious. So we're going to start off with somebody that was embraced by the Surrealist, who was sort of a proto-Surrealist. His name is De Chirico. The way that you can recognize his works, there's often an abandoned piazza or square in Italy, and certainly when I traveled there with my family recently, there's just you're walking in Rome or you're walking in Florence, and you just come across all of these squares. There's such a sense of community. It's amazing in these Italian cities. He also experiments with central point perspective, using it as a means by which to create these sort of haunting worlds. And what else? Yeah, that's good for these two at least. And then he also uses these mass-produced anatomy books and architectural tools. And then one of his big things, which actually influences Max Ernst, who we're going to talk about in a couple minutes, is that he makes larger objects, like the ball and the glove and the sculpture, makes them larger in this setting. Okay, I used to say that Max Ernst was my favorite artist of the past. I don't know if that's true anymore. Probably. All right, so this is Max Ernst. He was German, and he is definitely a surrealist. Andre, I'm forgetting his name. The head of the surrealists. Andre Breton was his name. He was French. He was head of the surrealists. He was kind of a dictator. He's the one that kind of decided who was in and who was out. You'd think if he was a surrealist that he'd be a pretty open-minded guy, but he truly wasn't. Okay, is this Duchamp's most famous work? Yes. Two children threatened by a nightingale. There's a child in the arms of the man atop the structure, and then there's a young woman to the left. It's a painting, but it also has obviously some sculptural stuff going on, and it obviously is influenced by De Chirico with using central point perspective. I always like this little button in the upper right-hand corner, too. Okay, so this is based off of a West African oven that somehow Max Ernst became familiar with. And so, yeah, this is the Elephant of the Celebs. And one of the questions that comes up with the surrealists, especially with Rene Magritte, is that the question is, what were the surrealists' thoughts about women? Dorothea Tanning, and maybe this was self-serving because she was Max Ernst's last wife, thought that the surrealists did respect women, but I would say it's probably still a little bit up for question, is how I would sort of put it. Okay, and then all of a sudden, in the late 19th century, early 20th century, print images become rather cheap, and so Max Ernst is one of these surrealist artists who's interested in collage, as you can see here. I think this one's kind of fun, actually. And then, I don't know what's going on here. Maybe somebody should make a short film about this one. It's very sort of science fiction-esque, fantasy-esque. I don't know what's going on with the woman with the wings. I wonder if it was all influenced by the Annunciation scenes from Christianity in the Italian Renaissance. I don't know if I've ever seen a book on just Max Ernst's images like this. I would like to read into it a little bit more. And then he goes full fantasy figures with this one. And I love this stuff. It's so unique. Now, today, maybe it's not that provocative. But for me, he just sort of goes a really interesting route Later on, what's the dates on these? Yeah. So, yeah, he's by this time he's in the 1940s. Um, and then here you have 1941, Napoleon in the Wilderness. Okay, let's go to Leonora Carrington, who was his, I think it's safe to say, partner for a bit of time in Europe. And here she has an image of good old Max Ernst on the right. I like his socks. And then she ends up moving to Mexico and does these really interesting works. Now, of course, one of the things that the Surrealists were interested in was the subconscious. And so, uh, and also, I should have said this a long time ago in this lecture, but they were also interested in Freudian concepts and obviously, too, dreams. Dreams were a huge part of their process. And she actually is a published, she was a published author, and there's been a lot of interest in her short stories and her novels as of late. So she was truly somebody that was sort of an expansive artist. And then here's another one from Carrington. Now, can you recognize always it's her work? I think so. I think she had this signature sort of haunting style that yeah, is pretty identifiable, I would say. So that's Leonora Carrington, and now we're going to look at Dorothea Tanning. There's a big show about her that's coming up, and the story goes that Max Ernst was in the United States, I think in New York City. Dorothea Tanning was from a town in Ohio, I believe, and she was a fashion illustrator, and Max Ernst came through to her apartment, and he saw this painting called The Birthday, which is a self-portrait with a flying skunk. He said, Dorothea, quit being a commercial artist, come with me, and let's be artistic partners together for the rest of our lives. And that's what happened. And Tanning actually ends up later on doing soft sculptures that are, I think, somewhat surrealist based. She kind of gives up painting, and then she becomes a poet. And I have a couple of her poetry books, actually. So, yeah. I just love Dorothea Tanning. I always have. I would love to see some sort of documentary about her. And then here they are in the Southwest, I think. I think this is a collaborative sculpture, or maybe, well, everything they started to do, I think you could basically define as collaborative. I think there's actually a metal sculpture of this in the National Gallery that I'm familiar with. And then this is Portrait of Muriel Levy. And hold on a second, I want to know a little bit more about her. Okay, one of the advantages of being able to stop my recordings is to get more information, and I had no idea that Muriel Levy was a surrealist painter who was a very close friend of Dorothea Tanning, so mystery solved. And then here's what I was talking about. So she goes into these soft sculptures. This one's called Rainy Day something, and I just love how she changes her overall medium and really, goes on and on to live for a very long time. She dies at 98. So she's got some lessons for us, I think. Okay, and then this is something a little bit different. This is Leonore Finney, and this is called The Operation. And it's possibly, and then this one, no, this is The Operation. The other one was a photograph. And then this is The Operation, and it's obviously influenced by our friend Bosch's Cutting the Stone. Okay, Rene Magritte is the famous surrealist artist from Belgium. There's a brand new museum that is opening up with his works. And this is the Menaced Assassin. And then this is one of the most famous works of art ever. This is The Treachery of Images, and it says, "This is not a pipe." And so, much like Duchamp's ideas, Rene Magritte is saying, hey, maybe the purpose of art is not to create an illusionistic three-dimensional world and try and fool your eye. Maybe there's something of higher value that we can use. Or maybe there's something of higher value that can be the focus of art, as opposed to just trying to make a pipe, paint a pipe. Okay, yes, this is one of his more provocative works. This is a painting that I think is actually having a conversation with the lengthy history of the female nude in art. And then this one is sort of a summary of some of his more famous paintings. He's always got a lot of clouds. I like to call these gray spaghetti jingle bells. And then again, back to women here on the left, and then this image here of nature and greenery. And then I've always kind of liked this one. I don't know why. I imagine most people don't put in a slide lecture, but there's Jesus on the left, Dante on the right, and who would you put in the middle? So it's kind of a fun little play on history. And then this one's at the Chicago Art Institute. It's one of their more beloved paintings, I would say. And he, along with the other surrealists, were interested in clocks, were interested in locomotives. And yeah, so how many, are there a lot of Magrittes in the United States? That's an interesting question. I think so. I mean, we have one at MIA. Maybe even have two. But yeah, your larger encyclopedic museums definitely have a Magritte. He was very prolific, created a lot of work, and so it makes sense that he's well collected in the United States. And then here's ours. So again, this is playing with that whole idea of the purpose for art is not just to fool your eye into thinking that on the easel is is it a painting or is it actually reality looking through the window? And the only way you can tell is the edge of the canvas. And he did a lot of paintings like this, again, where he's calling into question the nature of art. And my oldest sister loved Styx, the band, and they had this album that came out when 1977, the year my sister graduated from high school. And it's heavily influenced by Magritte's painting on the left. There you go. All right. And then, of course, one of the things that he's known for more than anything else is the bowler-hatted man with the apple in front. I think I might have at some point actually seen this. I'm pretty sure I have live and in person. Um, in a show, I think in New York City. So one of the things about the bowler-hatted man is, in my opinion, it's a discussion of the modern world and how everybody in the early 20th century starts to look alike, going to work at the same time, all that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit of that, I think. Okay, Salvador Dali, one of the most famous artists out of all of the people we're talking about today. Dali would be hands down the person that would be most well known. And so this is Persistence of Memory, with the melting clocks. And then this is Soft Construction with boiled beans. And one of the things that people don't realize about Dali, again, we seem to have this theme a lot lately, is that he could paint with the best of them. He could paint a very realistic world, and he just chose not to. That just wasn't how he approached art as a surrealist. And he had a bit of a Christian sort of theme in his art. This is a huge painting that's at the National Gallery of Art in DC. I've seen it quite a bit, and I'm not a huge fan of his Christian stuff, but others are, and that's fine. Yeah. So that's The Last Supper. Okay, then there's this new type of surrealism called biomorphic surrealism. And essentially, it's what you would see under a microscope. And it's only done by this one artist, French artist, Yves Tanguy. One time I had this assignment in art history where everybody dressed up as an art movement. And one of my students held a microscope in his hand, and I think he also had some kind of a funky shirt too on, and he was biomorphic surrealism. Okay, so here's one, and then here's another. Do I have the one that's at Mia? Yes. So yeah, anytime you're at Mia and going through the galleries, you can see this one. I love the colors in this one. I just love, love, love the palette. And then here's another one. Multiplication of arcs, or is that replay to the red? I can't remember. And another one. Obviously, I like biomorphic surrealism. I'm showing you a lot of them. Okay, so Dorothea Tanning and Max Ernst were a famous surrealist couple, and another famous surrealist couple would be Tanguy and Kay Sage. And Kay Sage is an American. And here's some of her works. You can see that, I think you can see definitely that she's influenced by her husband. Or maybe she influenced him. Maybe. Turnabout's fair play. And then another one. I Saw Three Cities is this one.